2. Steal. The tension that had been brewing inside of me all day reached a boiling point. I'd lost count of the number of applicants we'd interviewed. The day felt wasted, with no promising candidates, and nothing to show for hours of my time. I paced back and forth, matching my steps to the relentless ticking of the clock. I turned to glower at my assistant Lauren. "You guaranteed you'd fill the position today."
"And I assure you, I'm worth every penny you pay me,"
Lauren breezed. "Did you change your mind about one of the candidates?"
"No."
"Then can you explain why you sent everyone away?" I asked, raking a hand through my hair as my frustration mounted ever higher. Lauren crossed her arms defiantly and glared right back at me.
"Have I ever failed you before?"
she asked, sounding annoyingly confident. Instead of answering, I growled and checked the time on the clock once more. I hated being in the city. I felt closed in. I needed to return to my estate, but I couldn't do that until my staffing issue was resolved. I crossed my arms and leaned back against the wall. My ears perked up at the unexpected sound of heels clicking rapidly on the tile floor outside the door. Was someone running? How unprofessional. My eyebrows raised in shock as the door to my office burst open and a woman stumbled inside. Her scent hit me first, ushered in, no doubt, by the breeze created by her forced entry. She smelled of wild berries and jasmine. I inhaled sharply, unable to stop myself from drawing more of her sweet aroma towards me. She was absolutely stunning. Her long brown hair cascaded over her shoulders and draped invitingly over her perfectly rounded bosom. She was tall for a woman, but not too tall for me. She looked up, and the defiant gleam in her eyes rocked me for a moment. Something primal sprang to life inside of me, but I ruthlessly shoved it back into the darkest recesses of my mind. I didn't have time to entertain such impossibilities. I swallowed, blinking my eyes to clear my vision, and stared her down determinedly. One thing was certain: there was no way I could hire this woman. It didn't matter how qualified she might or might not be. She would prove too much of a distraction. I would never get any work done with her around. I needed to get rid of her as expeditiously as possible before I did something stupid.
Crystal. The knob turned easily in my hand as I burst into the room. The office was ridiculously lavish, and it screamed money. The indignant secretary was hot on my heels, demanding for me to cease, but I ignored her and focused my attention on the people occupying the office space. There were 2 of them, a gorgeous, well-dressed woman with stylish blonde hair, and a tall, brooding Adonis who really had no business being so good-looking and rich at the same time. It really wasn't fair. He probably had an ego the size of a football field to go with it. Why did all attractive men have to be such narcissists? Mr. Billionaire was wearing a suit that looked like it was custom-tailored to his deliciously trim, muscular body. Beards weren't normally my thing, but his carefully sculpted facial hair looked so good that I was itching to run my fingers through it. His chocolate brown eyes were drawing me in like a tractor beam, and I had to press my hand against the doorframe in order to resist eagerly taking another step towards him. I felt compelled to squeeze his arms to see if he was as muscular as I was hoping. It was hard to tell with the cut of his suit jacket, but I really hoped it wasn't just padding. I wasn't sure exactly what had come over me. I might have continued gawking at him indefinitely if he hadn't spoken.
"The interviews are over,"
he stated coolly as he stared at me with bored indifference. Thanks to his height advantage, I felt even less like his social equal. He studied me in a way that made me feel like he resented the fact that I was breathing his air. Those eyes, I couldn't tear myself away. It didn't matter that the way he was looking at me made me feel as lovely as a big pile of stinky garbage that the janitor had failed to remove. So much for my delusional fantasies that he might possibly be as attracted to me as I was to him. Whatever. I wasn't there to hunt for a new boyfriend. What I needed was a job that paid well. At the time, That was my one and only prospect, and I refused to let it go easily. No, I would not go gentle into that good night. Okay, I know that was cheesy. Just remember that I read way too much and cut me a little slack already. I was done with gentle. And I was so ready to rage against the dying of the light. If it weren't for the fact that he was already dead, I'm pretty sure that Dylan Thomas would have rolled his eyes at me big time for ripping off his uber-famous poem. Man, I hated how much I needed a job. It wasn't even in my field. I was supposed to be working in publishing. That's where I really belonged and why I had worked so hard to get my degree.
I tried to stop her, Mr. Steele.
The secretary panted behind me, out of shape and out of breath. I bet she takes the elevator every day too, I thought snarkily. Her hand locked down hard on my arm as she prepared to forcibly drag me out of the office. All of that typing and phone answering had given her super strong fingers, and I had to bite back a strong expletive about what she could do with her Superman grip. I really couldn't decide what my next course of action should be. I was in a bit of a pickle.
Let her stay, Eric.
The attractive blonde behind the desk spoke loudly and with authority. I wasn't sure why she'd chosen to come to my rescue, but I wasn't about to complain. Maybe not all blondes were mean. Come to think of it, it didn't seem fair to blame all blonde women for the fact that a certain fair-haired smarty pants had danced the horizontal salsa with my cheating ex. I decided to judge the woman on the merit of her actions, hair color be darned.
Are you certain?
Steele questioned gruffly. For a moment he looked like a petulant little boy whose mother had told him that there would be no dessert after dinner. The blonde nodded decisively, and Steele waved the secretary out of the room. She shut the door behind me so hard and so fast that it almost took my arm off. Thankfully, I managed to whisk my fingers out of the way just in time, keeping all of my digits blessedly intact. The blonde behind the desk laughed, but Steele didn't appear to be amused in the slightest. Well, come to think of it, I didn't find almost losing a hand all that funny either. I was at a loss as to what to say next. I hadn't really given much thought to my plan of attack beyond forcing my way into the room. He glared at me and held out his hand expectantly.
I assume you have a resume?
Steele asked imperiously. Oh, of course, I stammered, pawing through my leather-bound portfolio. Okay, so I lied. It wasn't really leather at all. It was some sort of plasticky pleather, but it still looked nice and professional, and it wasn't like I had plans to use it all the time anyway. I retrieved a copy and handed it to him. I'd printed it on classy paper that looked like high-end stationery, or at least that's what the sales clerk had assured me when I'd purchased it.
It appears you would be better suited to a job in publishing,
he stated after he'd scanned the contents. The first words to pop up in my head were, "Brilliant deduction, Watson." But I wisely kept my sarcasm to myself. I'd already done enough damage for one day with my forced entrance, possibly enough damage for a lifetime. I've made a terrible first impression, I said bluntly, looking him boldly in the eye. So I'm going to be frank and admit that I would have greatly preferred to land a job in the publishing community today. Unfortunately, my slimy toad of an ex has ruined all chances of that for me. I need a job, and I need it today. I'm a fast learner and a hard worker. You won't regret hiring me. Seriously. He ignored my eager rant and moved forward with his intense interrogation tactics. His unwavering eye contact was beyond intimidating.
You understand that this job requires you to reside full-time at my estate and that my home is very remote. I keep odd hours, and it may be necessary at times to travel with little to no notice.
I'm currently living in a motel that I can't afford, so that won't be a problem.
What is your family situation?
He asked bluntly. Are you asking if I'm pregnant? I asked incredulously.
No, but are you?
Thank God, no.
Extended family?
he asked, frustration weighing heavily in his voice. I was pretty sure I'd read somewhere that it was illegal for employers to ask personal questions like this in a job interview because it could be grounds for discrimination. But at this point, I really didn't care. I needed the job. I don't have any family.
She's lying,
the blonde announced crisply, and I had to resist glaring at my so-called ally. I don't speak to any of them. I've intentionally burned all my bridges, so they may as well not exist. They are not a part of my life in any way. Sharing a few branches on a family tree doesn't mean someone gets to be a part of your life, I explained. The blonde frowned at Steele like she was his own personal lie detector or something. What I would have given to hear what was going on beneath those bleached platinum roots. But alas, poor Yorick, I wasn't a mind reader. She closed her eyes like she was meditating or something. It was beyond annoying, but apparently I'd managed to pass the family hurdle because, after a tense pause, she opened her eyes and nodded affirmatively at Steele. That was more than good. It was fantastic. As far as I was concerned, that discussion was over and done with, as in, put a period at the end of the sentence. We weren't talking about it anymore. I wasn't about to go spilling my family history to a couple of people I'd just met. That stuff was personal. Everyone was entitled to a few secrets, and some skeletons were better left in the freaking closet, under 5 layers of Christmas decorations and a bunch of crap that you didn't even remember buying in the first place.
She's the one, Eric,
the woman stated confidently, and I couldn't help but admire what good taste she had. Of course I was the one. I was all that and a bag of freaking chips.
I told you I didn't want a woman,
he argued, glaring at the blonde.
They question everything and have an annoying tendency to fall in love with me.
Wow, that was highly offensive, not to mention discriminatory. Wasn't he supposed to have a legal department to guide him on stuff like this? I couldn't resist snorting before I responded disdainfully. I assure you that, so long as your checks don't bounce, I can keep my heart firmly under control. On the plus side, I was becoming less attracted to the man by the second, which would certainly make working for him easier. Every time he spoke, his hotness meter plunged another number. He'd started off at a 10, and by the end of the interview, he'd be lucky to be a 2. The blonde let loose a throaty laugh, but Mr. Steele was woefully unamused. He grunted as he turned, meeting my gaze in an unnervingly direct way. I almost felt like I should apologize or something, but I bit my lip to keep in the words. He was the rude one, and I didn't want to set some sort of precedent of always having to say sorry for stuff that wasn't even my fault. I was already mentally preparing myself for the final job rejection of the day. So his next statement surprised me big time.
How soon can you pack and be ready to go? I'd like to leave this infernal city as soon as possible.
His tone was clipped, begrudging, and rude, but none of that registered. Holy crap! He'd actually offered me the job. How on earth I'd managed to land the position was totally beyond me. I'd officially broken every rule in the book, and I was still walking away with the prize. I decided to keep being myself at that point because the whole transparency thing was obviously working for me. Pay for my cab fare, and I can be back here in less than an hour, I replied bluntly. He pulled a $100 bill out of his wallet and handed it to me.
My helicopter is on the roof of this building. I'm leaving in exactly 1 hour, with or without you, Miss Banks.
Understood, I replied, bobbing my head up and down like an idiot. I thanked him for the job, and then I took off as fast as I could out of the office. I waited until I reached the lobby to take off my heels so he wouldn't see me in such an undignified condition. Then I ran barefoot across the dirty city sidewalks and hailed the first taxi I saw. I couldn't believe it, but somehow I'd landed the job. Given my insane stunt of forcing my way into the man's office, this was surprising to say the least. It was shaping up to be one of the strangest days of my life. There was no stopping the big, stupid grin that threatened to split my face in two. Maybe my future wasn't destined to be so awful after all. I'd managed to land a job with a smoking hot billionaire with the added bonus of free room and board. Take that, school debt. Prepare to be toast. I would happily have continued to daydream in the back seat of the cab, but there was no ignoring the fact that the taxi was traveling at a snail's pace. I hadn't factored in the rush hour traffic, so even with the cab, I would be cutting it close. When we reached my motel, I told the man to wait and that I would be right back. He tried to holler after me, demanding his payment, but I knew if I paid him, I only had a 50-50 shot of him sticking around like I wanted. I couldn't risk the time it would take to hail another taxi, so I had to be a little slimy. I hoped to repair the damage to my karma by giving the man a nice tip. It took me less than 10 minutes to pack up my stuff. What can I say? I've never been big on material possessions. Call me a minimalist if you will, but I was really too cheap to spend my own money on anything but the bare essentials. I was usually more than happy to make do with everyone else's furniture and such. All I cared about was my clothes, and I rarely had excess funds to splurge on those. I didn't want to risk missing my deadline, so I kept the ugly suit on, even though the reflection I caught in the mirror on the way out frightened me. The man had made it quite clear that he wasn't interested in my body, and vanity could cost me my position before I even started. "Fugly is so hot right now," I intoned in my best fashion designer voice as I rode the elevator down to the lobby and sprinted back to the cab. The driver raised his eyebrows when I gave him the address back to where he'd just fetched me. He no doubt encountered stranger requests on a daily basis and took it all in stride. The traffic was even worse on the return trip. I wasn't really a religious person, but that didn't mean that I was above praying when I really needed something. On the way back to the office building, I kept up a near-constant litany of, "God, please get these stupid cars out of my way so I don't lose this job." I shoved the $100 bill at the man when we arrived. I didn't have time to wait for the change, no matter how desperately I wanted to. Plus, I still felt a little guilty about making him wait to get paid the first time around. I looped multiple bags over my arms, and I was already panting and out of breath by the time I reached the elevator. When I saw the temporarily out of order sign taped on the steel doors, I felt as though I'd been slapped in the face. Was the universe screwing with me? I ditched a box containing feminine hygiene products and makeup on the ground as I sprinted for the stairwell. All of those items could be easily replaced. Next, I kicked off my high heels, abandoning them on the ground where they fell. My bags weighed me down heavily as I climbed one staircase after another. I didn't even know how many stories there were because, at some point, I lost count. "Keep climbing!" I chanted inwardly as I focused all of my energy on the ascent. I was 5 seconds away from a full-on cardiac arrest when I breached the landing to the top floor. I shoved open the door and shouldered my way outside. The helicopter blades were already whirling about, but the chopper was still firmly planted on the ground. The air currents the machine was throwing off were fierce, but I hadn't come that far to give up. I ran towards the aircraft, doing my best to keep my head low so that I didn't get decapitated. Steele pushed open the door and glared at me as I threw my luggage and shopping bags into the back row of seats. I couldn't help but feel like he'd been secretly hoping to leave before I returned.
"You're late,"
he accused. I didn't bother to defend myself, doubting he'd care about mundane things like traffic and malfunctioning elevators. Not deigning to speak, I focused instead on buckling myself into the complicated harness system. I hoped he wouldn't notice how nervous I was. I wasn't a huge fan of planes to begin with, and the smaller the aircraft was, the more nervous I got. This here was a 2-seater chopper, so I wouldn't have been surprised if I was visibly shaking. I regretted ever watching that Buddy Holly documentary. It was what had fueled my belief that small aircraft were nothing better than death traps. Are you sure you know how to fly this thing? I asked, hating the pathetic tremor in my voice.
Yes.
He shot back tersely. After that point, I gave up trying to carry on a conversation with the world's most boorish man. The helicopter was too loud for talking anyway. I tried to enjoy the flight. After all, the small world below looked quite beautiful from this vantage. Much to my surprise, I relaxed enough to doze off at some point. I woke up to a sharp nudge in the arm. At first, I wanted to upbraid him for poking me, but when I saw the lush countryside laid out beneath us, I was actually glad he'd woken me. I was used to the harsh grays and neons of the concrete jungle, but here, everything was laid out in verdant shades of green. I could almost see why he chose to risk flying about in his little chopper of death. As we approached his estate, I couldn't get over how vast it was. There was an enormous stone fence surrounding the main grounds around the house, but I had no doubt that he owned a ton of the surrounding acreage as well. The forest called to me, demanding that I acknowledge its magnificence, and I did everything but drool in appreciation. I'd never seen trees quite so big. They must have been hundreds of years old. The forest seemed almost magical, and I would have loved to drop everything to explore it right then and there. But somehow, I doubted my new employer would have sanctioned such a frivolous waste of time. He wasn't the type of man to be swayed by whimsy. From what I could see, he was a man of few passions. I was willing to bet that he sat around counting his money for fun. Maybe he even swam in it like Scrooge McDuck. Steele landed the chopper on his own personal helipad. I waited until he'd killed the engine before undoing my harness. They could have filmed Jane Austen movies there because the impressive edifice looked like it belonged somewhere in England instead of smack dab in the USA. There was a large circular fountain set into the cobbled drive in front of the house, and the mansion itself was constructed out of a lovely cream-colored brick. I gave up trying to count all the windows after I realized that Steele was already a good distance ahead of me. I wouldn't have put it past him to lock the door in my face and leave me twiddling my thumbs in the yard with no means of contacting the outside world for help. He was one cold cookie. I'd gone from feeling like I was going to wind up homeless and sleeping on a park bench to moving into a mansion in less than 24 hours. It was a lot to process. Steele didn't offer to help with my bags, but I hadn't really expected him to. After all, he'd hired me to assist him, not the other way around. As I struggled to retrieve my bags from the chopper, a scary thought popped into my head. I still had no idea what this job would entail. Whatever it was, I was all in. I didn't have a plan B. "Please don't be a murdering psychopath," I muttered under my breath as I snuck a glance at his retreating form.